Hi everybody, we're back here in beautiful Provo, Utah, Orem, Utah. I don't know, they're
Across the
like,
street.
yeah. Anyway, Utah. It's a gorgeous location. I'm here at Tekton Design with Eric Alexander. Been here for a day already. This is a second video that we're doing, and this one we're going to talk about speakers. And for this one, since we're talking about speakers, I got to say, the way I got to know Eric was when I decided to order some Tekton Moabs. And before I ordered the Tekton Moabs, I did a lot of research. I read all kinds of reviews, mostly by audiophiles online. And then the last thing I did was, I think it was Clement Perry I called, because he was the only guy I could find who had personally heard both Ulfberts and Moabs in his home system. And so I was really curious because at the time I had these Talon Chorus speakers, which I loved them when I bought them. And they're like very expensive speakers. And I was concerned, I knew I could find better speakers, but I was concerned that no matter what people said about the Tekton speakers, that even though I was pretty sure they'd be better, but I wasn't thinking that, like, I was convinced that I would have to get the best speaker, the Ulfbert, in order to do something that was better than what I had by enough that I'd be happy to have gone through the trouble. That's what I thought at the time, okay? And so I called Clement Perry and I talked to him and I was like, Moab or Ulfbert, you know, which way, what are the differences? Which way should I go? He basically told me that there is so little difference between them that I would
There's
be
not a lot of difference.
that I'd be really happy with the Moabs, and I could do an awful lot with the difference in the price to do other things in my system. And so I thought, well, this is a guy who's a respected reviewer who's heard these. Well, anyway, so then the next thing I do is I talk to Eric about ordering them. And right from the beginning, I discovered two things. This guy's incredibly busy, and yet, as busy as he is, he's willing to take time to talk to people, which is kind of crazy. I have a hard time believing that if I called Wilson Audio, I'd be able to get the guy who builds the speakers to talk to me on the phone. Or I should say, like, one of the 30 guys who build the speakers. In fact, I know this because I recently, when I'm on my trip, I try and check around with people that I'm going nearby and I'd like to come and visit, and I couldn't even get a response from Wilson for a week. So I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't be able to go and talk to the number one guy at Wilson Audio and get this kind of response. So anyway, I get my Moabs, and anybody can go online. Unfortunately, it's like on this Audio Goon channel or website that I used to waste time on. But if you want to go on there, the reviews are still up on there, and you can read all about it. How thrilled I was. To this day, I can honestly say I have not heard speakers other than other Tekton speakers that I would prefer to the Moabs that I had. Now, I gotta say one more thing before I let Eric take over, and that is that when I got my Moabs, I was like very impressed with them. And then it wasn't very long that I discovered, oh wait, there's the crossover. It's not that hard to get access to that crossover. There's a lot of space. All these things matter. Easy access, space, and you have to have a speaker that it's worth putting more money into. Got to have all of these. Otherwise, I hope you just enjoy tinkering, because you're not going to get your bang for your buck out of it. But all those things were there with the Moabs. You took a woofer out and there was the crossover, and I could do this. And so you can also go on the same Goon site and read my review where I did this major crossover upgrade. I completely upgraded the crossovers. And the result of that was I really have not heard other speakers since then that I think would hold a candle to these, other than, well, if you watch one of my other videos, Mike, he's got the ULF 15s, and he got the ultimate crossover upgrade, and he was thrilled. He thinks you gave him a hell of a deal on that. So that's my introduction. I'm talking to a guy who's a prolific designer and is very accommodating with regards to the customer. Just look at the time he's putting out to talk to me today. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Chuck. I want to talk individually with my clients. We're always happy when somebody does their background research and just hits the buy it now button. But I'm eager to help you get the perfect speaker, whether it's in the price range you want, or has the polar response that you want, or what be it, So yeah, we have a lot of different models. And my first, of course, what we're talking about is this, the Moab and the Ulfbert, and that's our patented low mass algorithm loudspeaker. You've owned it, you've heard it, and you're not dreaming.
It's the best mid-range I've heard, period.
Well, yeah, and we have been bold enough to put in our marketing that it's perfect mid-range, and I didn't coin that phrase. I will never forget going to Rocky Mountain Audio Fest 2017. I'm there with Richard Schramm and the Parasound crew. Clement Perry was there. Clement Perry has personally sat in front of Moabs with me, and we've listened to them, and Encores and Double Impacts. And all of a sudden, there's this clamor and chatter about how we were doing perfect mid-range. And I had this thought. I thought, I've been designing speakers for 20 years. I've worked as an engineer, making a good living, sitting in an anechoic chamber for 4.5 years, 8 hours a day, and designing model after model after model. And I thought, I've been to all the trade shows. I've never heard the words perfect mid-range roll off the tongue of an audiophile. And I'll be danged, the first time I ever heard it was somebody talking about our work and what we were doing. So I've recently had this, of course, all this evolves, and I'm a forward-thinking person. I think you've been here long enough that I'm not slowing down. I'm not stopping.
No, it's crazy.
No,
I've
not.
been here, and he's running constantly.
So we're in the pursuit of perfection. We really are. I forget where I was going with this.
That's okay.
Well, okay, so here's the story, the perfect mid-range. One of the things I'm talking like within the last couple of weeks, because story after story after story, and I'll share one with you. I think you've heard it. We spoil people. We spoil audiophiles. Do we make the perfect speaker? No. Do we have a luxury model that sells for $180,000 or $630,000? No. But that base is covered. I love what I do. I want the average audiophile to be able to come onto our website or call me and pick out a speaker that sounds phenomenal for the price. So we spoil people. So I'll share a story with you. Got a client named John, and anybody that wants to call me, I'll tell you his last name, I'll give you his phone number. So John has Moabs, just like you. And after he'd had him for 3 years, he calls me on the phone. He says, Eric, the Ulfberts sound better. And just like, unprompted, just like you said. I said, well, yeah, I guess in a roundabout way, but honestly, it's not that much. It sounds better, yes, but it's just this, it's interesting, the law of it's not a law, but this diminishing return kind of thing, it's like, okay, so you got to spend more money and you get a speaker that sounds 5 or 10% better. And we all know how that's how it works, that's how it works with DACs and amplifiers and a lot of things in this hobby that we have. And so I said, well, yeah, I guess so. So John's an audiophile and he's a clinical psychologist, and which I'm just saying that because it's like I'm not going to get any baloney past this guy. And so John says, all right, I'm ordering Ulfberts. So I finish his Ulfberts and I call him up to bill his credit card, and he says, you got a minute? I says, yeah. He says, let me tell you a story. And this is where I get back to, we're spoiling audiophiles with this perfect mid-range. We're spoiling them. he says, my wife and I started looking at speakers this size, and gosh, they're like
It's ridiculous.
expensive. So he says, we got in the car, we went down to the Focal dealer, and we auditioned Grand Utopias. I have to interject here. When I was in the 90s, Kimon Bellis, there's a name that some of you might know and most of you won't, but he was the guy designing the Focal drivers, and you could bring this stuff in OEM, and that all shifted, and JM Labs and all the OEMing ended. But I'd buy this stuff, and every time I'd get a chance to talk to Kimon, I'd be like, hey, you're my idol, and I want to pick your brain, and that kind of. I always felt like it was a privilege, and I say that because Focal's making some of the best stuff on earth. Like, irregardless of what your opinion of the speaker is, I'm telling you, they have a pedigree that takes it back to the best of the best. So I have nothing but respect for Focal. So it kind of makes this experience a little more intriguing. So they go down, they audition the Grand Utopias at $270,000 per pair. And he says, Eric, we walked out, we sat in the car, we looked at each other completely dumbfounded. And at some point he says, well, my wife looked at me and said, is Eric some kind of wizard? And of course, I'm not a wizard. I just love what I do. And he said, Eric, I would not buy that speaker under any circumstances because your mid-range was better. And then for the audiophiles that are watching this, I mean, mid-range is the meat on the bones. It is the most critical element, when you sit down and when you go to the symphony and the first note you hear is Concert A440, and all of the notes, the spectrum of the orchestra is above and below that and built around those medium frequencies, i.e. mid-range. That's where the music is. That's the most important part. And when I'm designing a speaker, I mean, we get the bass right. Like, we got the bass right on the Moab. It was actually quite easy. We say we're not going to compromise on the enclosure size. If I drop a marble in that back port and displace it, it's now not something that I intended it to be. It's a finely tuned bass speaker that's built the right size. And getting the treble right, I mean, put a good tweeter in it and get the balance right.
So we could go on all day about stories like this. I've got half a dozen of them myself. They're good stories, but I'd like to go into some of the more technical aspects of why it sounds that way. And I don't know if you're going to let me say this, but like, I was here yesterday when you got a call from a reviewer who's getting ready to come out with a review of the Ulfbert in the Absolute Sound. And folks, I was the fly on the wall while Eric's talking to him for like an hour, I think it was. And it was absolutely fascinating because first thing was, this reviewer did a really good job of disabusing me of this feeling and impression that I've established over the years where reviewers aren't really that great. They don't know that much.
Oh, he was brilliant.
And he's brilliant. He's flipping. This guy, the questions he was asking and the knowledge base that he was clearly coming from, I was really seriously impressed and surprised, because I've seen far too many reviews by people, and you've been like screwed on some of them where it's like, who is this guy? What does he know? No, this guy at the Absolute Sound, can I mention his name? Or
I don't have permission.
People will find it will come out. You will see the review. I'll be surprised if it's not a glowing review, because I could just listen to the questions he was asking and the comments he was making. But I was impressed with, he was asking technical questions, like he wanted to get clear in his mind how it is and why it is that this array of 14 tweeters that aren't tweeters. They're not, I mean, they're drivers. They're tweeters as far as the driver is concerned, they're tweeters. But for example, here, it's only the one in the center that's being crossed over and being used as a tweeter. So all the rest are mid-range, upper and lower.
We're implementing that as mid-range, and the tweeter is the most linear, accurate, lowest mass device that I can pull from.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's part of the secret sauce. It's not all of it, but it's part of it.
And the conventional approach to speaker design, for those who don't know, the reason you see all these two-way, three-way, four-way speakers with the different size drivers is the physics and the approach that everybody follows. They all follow basically the same approach. They say, oh, we have to put out this very high frequency, and the very high frequency has a very low wavelength. So we're going to use a very small driver because it's the size of the driver is relative to the wavelength of the sound that's coming out. And it's fast, it's small.
So it's short wavelengths
fast
and low excursion, low travel distance.
Right, and it's super fast response.
Yes.
And that's why
and it's very easily controlled, you know. And so when we think about a normal mid-range that might have to move at a high output, it's going to be moving 4 millimeters out and 4 millimeters back. And I don't want to get very far from the neutral zone. Like looking down on the speaker, we'll call that the Z-axis. We have a plus and we have a minus. Distortion goes up as that moves out. Distortion goes up as that moves back. And of course, music is AC and it's doing this. I want to stay in the neutral zone. I don't want to leave the center because that's where all of my flux density and the performance and the low distortion is. And we spread that power out evenly. And it's proof's in the pudding.
So then the conventional approach would be they'd say, well, now we go down in frequency into the mid-range.
Yep.
Now because it's a longer frequency, because remember the wavelength gets longer as the frequency goes lower. So we want a bigger driver because this is their thinking, is that we have to have this bigger driver because otherwise it's not going to reproduce that low of a frequency and it's not going to be able to move as much air. We can't have a tweeter traveling like you're saying, but now if we make a bigger driver, we won't have to, now we get back in that comfort zone again. And then they carry that same philosophy down and they say, oh, now we've got more of a budget. So now we've got the budget for a 3-way or a 4-way. So now we can use like a great big woofer and that'll be able to not have to move very far to get these really low frequencies. And that's why all the speakers that you see look all basically like that.
Very conventional.
It's very
Yep. There's 1,000. I've said this. There's 1,000 6.5-inch 2-ways. There's 1,000 8-inch 2-ways. We've rewrapped the package 1,000 times, but Einstein said the definition of insanity: repeat the same experiment and expect a different result. Yeah. I just you know what? I don't want to be that guy. I want to push the envelope. I want to go over the horizon and go, well, okay, we've all been there that way. I was online this morning and my gosh, there's 10 companies making what looks like an identical speaker. And you can go right to Crutchfield and buy them. They're very much cookie cutter. Half of them might, not half, but I know for a fact that a couple of them are made in the same factory over in China. So.
And they sound reasonably good, but I think a lot of the reason they sound reasonably good is because what are you going to compare it to? Well, other speakers that are doing the same thing.
You know, with all due respect, we've been reasonably good for 5 decades. And I love one of my dear friends, Clayton Shaw, and many of you guys know Clayton Shaw. And one day we're working, and because we worked together for years, and the same engineering projects, and he just pipes up and he says, well, you know, this sounds, what's going on here? It was CES time. None of this sounds better than the Dahlquist stuff did in 1982 or 1983. I had to get a chuckle out of that. I've never forgot it. But in a certain sense, he's right. And so there's been a tremendous improvement and a revolution in material science and things that, you know, especially, you know, what we're doing with AMT ribbons and some of these beryllium tweeters and things like that. I won't say that things don't sound better. They sound better than they ever have, but so much of what's going on is very conventional and not extremely forward thinking.
Well, and that's why it's so expensive, because the conventional approach and you can name your high-end brand. They're all doing the same thing. When you get up to the higher levels, they've got proprietary materials and proprietary construction, basically experimental, trying to figure out a way to make the cone lighter and stiffer, because they know they want to get the moving mass down very, very low, and the magnet stronger and the coil stronger and lighter, because they know they want to get the power. They want the power to weight ratio. They know that. Everybody knows that, because they're trying to get it to respond quickly and accurately to transients. But they're, at the end of the day, they still wind up with this driver that weighs 5 to 10 grams or more.
So there's the dilemma. There's the dilemma, and so part of what I was working on when I started developing this, and of course, I had this concept that I just had this. I had this moment where I understood completely, based on my music background. I thought, well, the 440 note on the violin is this open string, and gosh, that can't weigh much. And then if I put a bow on it and I barely touch it, I'm going to eke out something. It's going to, in other words, it will make sound. I don't have to put much weight into that to get that to scream at me. And I went down to the music store and I bought the string and I measured from the bridge to the neck, and I took that and I coiled it up and I laid it on a scale, and it was 1/3 of a gram. And I thought, well, I thought about the at the time the very popular DSP controlled 8-inch two-way that's being used in studios literally right now as we speak. JBL's got a DSP powered 8-inch studio monitor that's a two-way, being used in studios to make music right now. I thought, wow, we got a problem, because the moving mass of that speaker is probably 15 grams, and I'll tell you why. It has to handle power. As a product development engineer, one of the trade-offs, and good loudspeakers are all, good speaker design is an exercise in trade-off, literally. So I say, well, I can make that voice coil, I can use some copper clad aluminum, and I can lighten this up to very lightweight, and then so we go into full-on production, and the next thing you know, a month later, I got 28 guys calling me saying, hey man, my speaker just failed, it burnt out. Well, yeah, it burnt out because the coil was not heavy enough and couldn't dissipate the heat. So there's this balance that we have to play. So let's say that 8-inch two-way has 15 grams of moving mass, but the 440 note on the violin is 1/3 of a gram moment in analog. And then the way that we discriminate, is that a violin or an oboe or a flute playing 440, because most of the instruments in the orchestra can play the same note.
Right.
All right. The way that we discriminate that is through the overtone harmonic content of the note being played. So
the timbre.
We can instantly discern, oh, that's 440 on a clarinet. That's 440 on a violin. And so it's critical.
Or a viola or a cello.
Exactly. So in my mind, it's critical that we can get the overtones. They have to be intact and they cannot be altered. And my patent, with measurements included, and my patent just simply says that if my reproduction, and I had this discussion with you earlier, I make musical instruments. I make an interesting musical instrument.
Yeah.
So my musical instrument is designed to reproduce faithfully all the other instruments that we know of, including the human voice. I make musical instruments. Now, how do I say I make musical instruments? Because as soon as the current goes through the voice coil, that's a transducer, and we're moving that into the realm of acoustical physics.
Right.
We're modulating and propagating sound in the air, in the bottom of the ocean. There's the bottom of the ocean. And that's how musical instruments work. That's how my voice is working right now. I don't think speakers should be categorized so much in a branch of electronics. They're acoustical physics.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So then
Let's get.
Let me finish with the overtone part though.
Yeah.
So here's the thing: is if you have a heavy cone that's not mass matched. My patent says I want to design loudspeakers that are mass matched for the notes that are being played on these instruments. And if they're not mass matched, then I say now there's a little bit of exception. There's a little fudge factor here because you could go with a very high BL and a heavier cone and get some decent results, but you're not going to get the results we get. You're just frankly not going to get the results that we get. What we get is
those overtones will be subtly diminished.
Exactly. So the overtones must be subtly 440, 880, 1760. These multiples.
Right.
Well, if the tweeter doesn't kick in until 5,000 cycles, then we've got a bunch of harmonic structure that's attached to the fundamental 440 note that is diminished.
Because you're relying on a massive mid-range to reproduce it.
So it's diminished and it's subtly damped. And the way that comes across to an audiophile's ears is that it's a more of a warmer, fluidic sound. But that's not accurate. That's now becoming a personality trait that, to my music ears, when I go to, and I do this, we go to the orchestra, we sit, and I just critically focus. I want to hear those instruments because when, for example, we'll go to a Bravenel Hall and I'll sit on the balcony intentionally. I'll sit on the balcony right above the violins. So we've got the violins and the violas there, and they're playing in unison. I don't have a word for it, but what I will say, and every audiophile needs to do this, what I will say is that to me, when they're all playing in unison, it's like there's some type of plasma or electricity just hovering in the air. And you don't get that out of a loudspeaker. That's why these mass relationships are so critical, because we want to get at the resultant wave. That means, we've got an amplifier on the other side of the other side of the camera here. So we've got an amplifier that we have a source, and it sends the music down the line, so to speak, and then that goes through the speaker cable, and so that's called the resultant wave. Those subtle nuances, those details, those microdynamics, look at it on an oscilloscope, it's in there. But if the mass relationship isn't right, that's just going to fly right through the voice coil, and the speaker cannot respond correctly to it. We need a speaker that's literally a hammer butterfly. Muhammad Ali said, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. If you don't design a speaker with a low mass relationship and a very powerful magnet, you can't get there. And so just maybe to come full circle, that's how we spoil people. That's how come people go down and listen to speakers that cost 10 times more money and go, well, it sounds fantastic, but to my ears, I've been spoiled and I feel like something must be missing, or something is missing, and I'm not exactly feeling the love.
Now, there's 3 more things that are technical that I'd like you to explain to folks, because they're things that are important. At least I think they're important. So one of them is, when you have this array here and you've got all these tweeters that are doing mid-range, so they're behaving as if they are a single mid-range driver, but there's a physical relationship between the frequency and the spacing, so they can't, in other words, you can't just plaster a lot of tweeters on there and get the same result.
This is very calculated. This is a very calculated effort. When I came up with this low mass algorithm, I had not even discovered or invented or visualized any of these concepts. I had to start working at square one, going, what I go out and by the way, some of my competitors are doing this. So
they're coming after you now, as a matter of fact.
So. Yeah, not only coming after us, but we got companies like Monitor Audio.
They sick the cops on you, Eric.
Blatantly infringing on my patents, this all had to evolve, and it took a lot of time and a lot of effort to get it to evolve. Again, these are the most linear devices, and we spread them out and we control the power so that we're not just throwing out a flat wavefront. We're very interested in what do we have in linearity. Like, we're producing loudspeakers like the Ulfbert and the Moab that are just insanely linear, where it counts. So going back to the credo of perfect mid-range, you know, if we can make a speaker that goes from 200 hertz to 8,000 cycles, and there's no deviation, and we can. You saw on the screen last night, my Ulfbert.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, look, I got, like, it's a linear speaker. I mean, I've had people call me on the phone.
Well, your reviewer was saying
say,
as much.
This is the most linear speaker I've seen. What is it? You know.
But I gotta stop you for a second, because I want to make this clear, because I know there's like a lot of you people out there watching this thing, and you're just going, bullshit. There's like 14 tweeters there. They're going to be,
so there isn't
you
combing.
Can't image.
So there's no combing, and then in fact, so much so I'm adamant about the no combing. Pull up the stereophile review of our Impact monitor, which is the little sibling to this stuff. So the last thing John Atkinson said was, I keep going back to the polar response and how good it is. My horizontal average polar response. You want to know how good it was?
He said
the
it was
best
the
in
best.
The history of Stereophile magazine.
Yeah.
That's how good it was at the time.
I was showing people that when they complain about my Moabs. I'm like, Atkinson says.
So of course we have the closet acousticians that go, well, that doesn't work because I learned in Acoustics 101 that there's this thing called combing, and that just man, this guy must be a hack. This guy must be an idiot. There's combing. No, there's not, because when you start studying what happens in the far field, i.e. 2.5 times the distance of that pattern, they dovetail. They gel together. They uniformly sum, and it's a beautiful sound. Does it sound convoluted? I mean, no, of course not. It doesn't. And then the next thing that the closet acoustician, sorry, this is a bit of a sore point for me, get out your tape measure and start looking at the wavelength sizes, the distance of these wavelengths. You know? I mean, you go to combing at a quarter wavelength, okay?
Okay.
And so I was very careful to go, well, you know, we can't introduce any combing whatsoever. And so where combing can potentially become a topic, I immediately go to the center tweeter and we're done. In other words, I transfer the power. And by the way, there's another thing that's really important to mention that helps us get to that perfect mid-range. And those of you that have studied good crossover design, one of the most highly desirable crossover schematics would be the minimum phase network. So those 14 tweeters, they're typically done in minimum phase, absolute minimum phase. So in other words, there's no shunting components that cause it to turn into a resonant circuit. So it's minimum phase. Now, if I made a 2-way or a 3-way in minimum phase, I'm gonna run into some power handling issues. But we don't, because we distribute the power in a very proper and adequate way. I mean, there's thousands of these out there, so I'm not going to give you the numbers. No one's calling up saying, man, I just burnt out all my tweeters. In fact, quite the contrary. I'm not aware of a single client that has had a complete meltdown. So they handle tremendous amounts of power. Now, with the caveat of, this is not a house speaker, a house party speaker. That's what I meant to say. This is a very accurate reproduction device that does subtle nuances, micro details to near perfection, and you don't want to have a house party with the speaker. But for a song or two or a moment or two, I'm sure you turned yours up. I mean, that's back to the hammer butterfly and float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, because it's an
fun.
experience.
It's fun to listen at high levels.
It
to
is.
Play something like Nielsen Jump Into the Fire and feel the drum. You know, it's a trip.
Yeah.
And
Peter Brenniger, I'll never forget, and bless his heart, because he's deceased. But Peter, I mean, he's traveling all around the Capitol Audio Fest, and I had met him years before, you know. And of course, he's going from room to room to room, and he knew our gig, and we had Moabs set up. Peter and his wife come in, and he's like, all right, man, just lay it on me. Dead Can Dance, you know, and the big, sounds like Blue Man Group, and it's big and exciting. And he just sat there with a grin on his face. He got our business model, and it sounded good. It was visceral. It was dynamic. Frankly, with my drumming background and my music background, it just sounds right. It sounds right. And when you turn it up, it gets big and exciting, just like live music gets big and exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And the imaging is fantastic. And now that has something to do with the way, when you look at the way the drivers are laid out on here, the center is your tweeter, and then you've got symmetry above and below.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if the whole wavefront is coming from one location.
That goes back to one person that okay, he's a former Utah guy. He ended up in Colorado, but that's John Dunleavy in the Duntech. And there was a review done, just an interview done by him in Stereophile in the 90s. And I read that and I thought, well, number one, this guy's brilliant. This guy knows what he's talking about. And I'm a budding speaker designer. I think he's onto something. And so I made it a point to go to CES and look at what he was doing and listen to what he was doing. So there's one of my heroes. So
and when you go to like
and all of his stuff, that when you look at the Duntechs, it's done in vertical symmetry. I want to have where my audio files eyes and ears are. That's my center point, and that's where I want my tweeter. And then I want to build up and down from there in vertical symmetry. Now we have to have other models, and of course we're sitting on the other side of a Lure, and the Lure doesn't work like that. And the Lure is an amazing speaker in its own right, and it's a little more conventional. Anyway, there.
Well, and another thing that happens, a couple of things I got last night listening to your conversation was something that I had noticed myself, that whenever people would come over and I would play music for them, I made a point of playing them one thing that was just maybe someone singing solo, maybe with a guitar.
Sure.
Just a very small presentation, because I wanted them to know that just because the speakers are huge, that everything that comes out of them isn't huge.
Sure.
And you can actually hear, like, I don't normally like Springsteen.
So
his recordings are horrible quality.
Yeah.
We were talking about this.
Yeah.
But the Ghost of Tom Joad, for some reason, they did a pretty good job with it. And there's one where he's just him playing the guitar. Yeah. And it's like having Bruce Springsteen come in your listening room.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I can put on Tchaikovsky 1812 for my wife, and the whole Bleeding Orchestra is there in all its glory and size and scale, with the power and everything. And it's from the same speakers.
Yeah. So we need to touch on that. Of course, we make large speakers, and I don't make any excuses about it. When I put my musical experience hat on and not my audiophile hat, I say, well, these sound more real, more lifelike. We have more potential output. This is the realm that I want to work in. And so we have monitors, we have small speakers, but for the audiophile that's looking for the perfect reproduction, so to speak. Look, I got to get on my soapbox. There's no such thing as a speaker being too big. I'll give you a couple examples. Well, number one, Alex Rosner. There's another guy I admire. I mean, he's the first system integrator that was famous and did the nightclubs in New York when disco was big and things like that. He's in his 80s now, maybe even 90. And Alex talks about this experience where he has a restaurant owner call him up. He says, I want to put a pair of Klipsch horns in my kitchen, And he says, well, how big's your kitchen? Well, it's 8 feet by 12. And he's like, Alex is telling him. I mean, so here's a system integrator, a guy that's like us. He says, well, no, that's not a problem. That's not too big. We'll sink them in the wall, and then you have your klipschorns in your 8 by 12 kitchen. Now, think about this. It's never going to be overwhelming unless you turn it up. There's a volume control on it. And then there's part of this thing where if we can start, this is one of the things that I think a lot of audiophiles just skip over. I love that, again, my musical hat says, I want to migrate to very visceral and energetic type presentations, especially if it's The Who or Led Zeppelin or Bon Jovi or AC/DC. That's the type of music that, unless you're listening at midnight and there's other people in the neighborhood, that's the type of music that needs to be turned up to a higher level. And so, of course, that was to Alex Rosner, that wasn't a shock to him whatsoever. So when people call me up and they say I have a 12 by 13 foot bedroom that I've converted to my audiophile room,
Mike.
and then they say, well, you know, all the guys online are telling me that I've got to get this little speaker because it's a little room. I go, well, you know, no, all your friends online are suffering from little man syndrome, and don't hesitate going with a pair of Moabs. I've got guys with Ulfberts in bedrooms. They sound fantastic.
That's Mike.
They sound phenomenal. And so here's another example. And again, there's a volume control, folks. I mean, you can turn it down so low that you can barely hear it. So the size of the speaker doesn't matter. So for years I owned a car audio store, and that's where I came from. I did car audio and a lot of car audio installs during the daytime, and then I would lock the door on my building and I would create hi-fi and audiophile speakers at night while no one was there, and I'm all into the wee hours of the morning, and I'd get up the next day and do the same thing over. I did that through a majority of my 20s. And so car audio, I mean, think about it. We put big sound in the car audio.
It's hilarious.
The brand new Cadillac Escalade has 35 speakers in it. Okay. No, you're not going to overwhelm yourself. In fact, it's quite the opposite. These guys know exactly what they're doing, and it sounds fantastic. So a pair of Moabs in a bedroom is a very, not only is it realistic, but I would say it's a really wise. You're going to get some fantastic sound.
People can go and watch the video I did at Mike's. He's got the old 15s in his bedroom. And if I was him, I would have used the garage and parked the car outside, but he's got them in his bedroom, and they sound terrific in there.
So you know what's wild is I've watched so many of his video postings.
Yeah.
They sound really good.
Yeah.
And you know what? They sound like, I'm not trying to be biased here, but I've listened to other stuff that people are posting that are 10 times more money. We're talking 10 cents on the dollar.
Right.
And Mike somehow magically posts a video that just to my ears sounds superior in many ways. Not just one way, but in many ways.
And I don't want people, because they're going to be with this fanboy bullshit thing, but because I don't want to say like that his room is that great, because I was there. And you can watch the video, you can listen to the other rooms I've been to, and you can hear for yourself. The room does get overloaded because it's a small room. And if you crank it up high like that, the sheetrock and everything is not going to dissipate it that well. But the sound that's coming, that you're getting, if you don't crank it up that loud, is really, really good.
Yeah. Okay, so let me add a little bit to that. I'm not biased. I'm not brainwashed. And I have nothing but admiration and respect for the Focals and the Wilson Audios and the YG Acoustics, the Sonus Fabers, and these luxury brand speakers. In fact, I mentioned to you yesterday, I said, you know, a really wonderful machine would be a giant rotisserie. And we've got the 10 most highly regarded speakers on planet Earth, and you could magically hit a button and you go through the rotisserie. And so what are we going to get? We're going to get 10 of the most awesome speakers on Earth that have distinctly individual personalities.
Right.
And give me 7 to 10 days and I'll tell you exactly which speaker that we're listening to, and I bet you about every other audiophile out there could do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So I don't have a score to settle. I'm not trying to take over the speaker world. I just frankly love what I do. I want to create. I want to push the envelope. And if people don't think we can make a luxury brand, they're dreaming, or a luxury speaker, but that's not my business model. I've shared that with you. You know, as soon as we make a 500-pound inert cabinet, then we've taken our $4,500 speaker and we've tripled the price, and you need a piano mover to set it up.
And it doesn't sound as good as it did to begin with.
That base is covered. It's covered by 10 different brands. I don't necessarily, and now if a guy wants to call me up and have me do his bespoke pair of speakers, I'll make them. I'll make them out of aluminum. I'll make them out of whatever material they want them made out of, and we'll do that. But I'm not so interested in doing that as my business model consistently day in and day out. I want to make speakers and get them in the hands of audiophiles, and I feel very comfortable making speakers that have extremely high performance from that $2,000 to $10,000 price range.
And now you haven't broken or changed any of the laws of physics. So if your speaker's really big, you still have to deal with the reality that the imaging isn't going to be quite as good. And so you've got this one over here that I haven't heard yet, but I guess I get to hear it at some point.
Yeah.
That according to Brian McNamara and some other, and it has spooky good imaging.
So that goes back to our friend Brian McNamara, and a couple years ago, he just commissioned me to build this speaker. He's like, I want it really slender, which, I mean, none of this was a surprise to me. I've got Alex, are you back there? Okay, it's not Alex. So anyway, we make these little mini monitors, and they're teeny and they're skinny, and we put them out. And the first thing is my right hand guy Alex is like, oh my gosh, these things image so good. Well, this is a common fact that most people should be aware of, is that a little mini monitor is going to image impeccably well. Problem is the power response, and the opposite would be Klipsch. I mean, I watched a video from Klipsch, their main engineer, last week at Exponent. He's like, hey, our number one design goal is high sensitivity. Our number 2 design goal is power response, like this speaker here, and that's my version of what he's talking about. Power response as in we want to get an even power response distributed through the room, and my third goal is frequency response. Okay, so I have taken, again, we go back to the beginning, and I say, good loudspeaker design is an exercise in trade-offs. I know what I want to do. So I make speakers that are very well-rounded. Here's something you haven't heard me say. One of my goals, and we did this with the Pendragon, we do this with the Double Impact, we do this with the Moab, we do this with the Ulfbert, and even the Encore and the Symphony. So imagine this for a moment. Let's take 100 audio files, and let's lock them in the conference room at the Hilton, okay? So they're in there, and I say, I need 12 bullet points, audiophile attributes that a hi-fi loudspeaker, in order to be world-class, has to have. You go and lock yourself in there for an hour and come out with my 12 bullet points. My design philosophy, because it is an exercise in trade-offs, is I want to, let's just say you have 1 to 10 stars on all 12 bullet points. My goal is to measure high on every one of them. The Pendragon does it, the Double Impact does it, the Moab does it, the Ulfbert does it. Is it the best speaker on earth? No. But I'll stick my neck out. The Moab, that's the best speaker on earth for $5,100. And Crutchfield has 364 tower speakers last time I checked. They don't have anything that'll touch a Moab. No, they don't. And so I like where we're at. And so I want to hit those audiophile bullet points. I want to score high on all 12.
There was another aspect of speaker performance that came up when you were talking last night, that I heard about it, but it's like one of these things I don't pay much attention to. And when he brought it up again, and I was like, oh, and it's something to do with your at lower frequencies, your wave comes off the floor,
Yeah.
and then that affects the power response. But if you have your woofers, like with the ULF or the Moab, they're widely, it helps to mitigate that.
Yeah, so all this is years of working in anechoic chambers and testing and designing loudspeakers.
Yeah.
And so, I don't want to offend anybody, but there's a lot of really crappy speakers out there that people think are fantastic speakers, famous names that we'd all know. And so that's one of the things that I've put a lot of effort into. I don't particularly want to talk about it because a lot of it's proprietary. But again, for a world-class loudspeaker, a guy needs to set it up in his living room, not an anechoic chamber.
Right,
Okay?
a room.
He's gonna set it up in his dedicated hi-fi room, his living room, his whatever he's got. And as a designer, which, we don't publish measurements. And I think that's funny because I was not the first company to come along that doesn't publish measurements. You've seen measurements. You know what? These speakers are measuring they're primo. Don't skip over buying or auditioning. At least let's not say buy, let's just say audition. Don't skip over auditioning a Tekton Design speaker because we don't publish measurements. You saw my race cars. This is something that goes back 50 years to me, 45 years, and I take it very seriously. I'm not one of the YouTube posters that wants to, YouTube video speaker guys that wants to run around naked and telling and sharing everything I know. I'm just not that way. I got my cards close to my chest, and there's things that I just frankly don't want to talk about. And at some point, if I find someone that I want to have as an apprentice, I'll probably start teaching him. I mean, I'm 59, I'm not going to be doing this forever. And I'll probably teach them some of the secret sauce and the way we get things done. But back to this philosophy, I don't have the Klipsch philosophy. Klipsch, sensitivity number 1, power response number 2, frequency response number 3. Again, I go back to my bullet points. Look, I need a high sensitivity speaker. If it's not high sensitivity, now we don't want to go to the highest level of sensitivity because those are unruly and not linear. So we've found a sweet spot, and that's where I want to be. So I want a medium sensitivity to a high sensitivity. I want linearity. I want a nice frequency response, and I need it to be from 20 hertz to 40 kilohertz. And man, the more linear I can get it, the better. And not only are we getting it the more linear, the better, but we're doing it in minimum phase where it counts, all where the magic of the mid-range is. There's a little bit of my just being open and candid about what we do.
So since you brought this up, something that I can't blame you for not being open and candid about is, like, when I was at Shinyata, I was like going around and shooting the whole place, and here we're sitting in front of this wall of speakers, and just so for you guys who have actually watched this excruciatingly long,
I'm willing to keep going.
Borderline narcissistic, conversation that we're having here. Yeah. Congratulations, you're the audience, but.
So have you seen enough speakers around here?
No, that's what I got to say. But I got to say that the reason we're here like this, and I'm not showing you stuff, is because when I came in here the other day, I'm walking around. Everywhere I look in this place is some speaker. A lot of them that I haven't seen before.
Most of them are off the grid.
Yeah, that I haven't seen before, and they're in various stages of completion. And so somebody like me that's got an eye for these things, I can look, and if there's no driver, you can see inside the cabinet the bracing and how it's made. And there's more going on to these things. People look at them and they see this box and I could just make that at my table. So it's like, yeah, good luck. There's more going on inside these things. And I want so badly to tell you what I see inside this one over here, but I can't. He's not going to go into it. But just let me tell you, it's like there's cleverness going on here that's more depth to it than you would think.
Thank you. Yeah.
And it's everywhere. It's like everywhere in this whole place. I had to bring the camera in and frame this thing like this, because any corner that you look, you're going to see something that's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I've said for years that, and of course, right off the picture, we've got a lure here, and that speaker is distilled down to nothing. Einstein. That's Einstein.
Yeah.
Make everything as simple as possible, but not too simple. That's one of his quotes that I admire and respect. That's simple. That I could write a white paper on everything I've done, everything about that, and it's brutally simple, and it gets it done. The lore has a bit of a cult following. I couldn't even tell you how many we've built and sold, and I had a guy call me a few weeks back, and this was the conversation. He says, Eric, I went over to buy some speakers at a guy's house, and when I walked into the room, he was playing music. And I said, what on earth are you listening to? And he says, oh, he'd never heard of the company. He says, oh, those are Tekton lures. And he said, Eric, I'm calling you today because I had the most musical, moving experience in my life sitting down in front of your lures, and I believe it was a Deckware tube amplifier.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah, a little bit.
Go.
Yeah,
yeah.
One or 2 watts, something like that.
Yeah,
yeah. So normally in my series, I've been kind of emphasizing the listening rooms, and I was thinking that when I came here that this is a guy who builds speakers, so he's going to have like this really impressive listening room. But it turns out that you can design really good speakers with a completely different approach. I can't tell you guys how, well, I can, because go watch my Tekton teaser video, and you'll see the man cave.
Yeah.
And we're listening to Encore, red piano gloss finish Encores in that room. And
so what did you think?
I thought that was probably, if not the best bass that I heard of every place I've been, that it was right there, and you'd have to be saying, okay, if you listen to the whole thing, you get one impression. But then if you stop and step back and you go, wait a minute, this is with a $75 Class D
IEMA Class D amplifier,
and you're playing it off of an iPhone, right?
Basically,
off of an iPhone through some really crappy wires.
Yeah,
and everything's just sitting on the floor. He put the speakers in position by eyeball. They're close, but they're not like, in my system at home, I get out a tape measure and a laser sight, and I've got it, and I can hear if they're like 1/8 of an inch difference. It affects the imaging. And here, we didn't do anything like that. He's got tape on the floor, and they're kind of close, but
these arrays, like we're talking about, they need to be perfectly leveled. So the speakers were perfectly vertical from side to side and front to back. And
but what I'm getting at is for what you said, 7,000. I think on that, if you watch the video, and at the end of the video,
under $7,000 for everything
there,
all in.
It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts.
Where are you going to get something that does that for $7,000?
Yeah, and then I go to Mike's, and Mike's sitting in his bedroom. He would be the first to admit, it's not the ideal listening room, and he's got these great big speakers, and so he's like shooting holes through all the audiophile paradigms about small speakers in small rooms and everything. He's blowing it out of the water. And then at the same time, I think he's like 30,000 or 50,000, something like that, for everything.
Well, I better share one thing with you so that it makes sense. And of course, right off camera, there's some of the best gear on earth, and it's all in boxes. And we love our relationship with our amplifier. The people that we have, we recommend products, they recommend products. I intentionally haven't gone out and tried to compete. I want to just make speakers. But part of my logic is that we get people flying here to audition and to meet me and see what we do. We get people flying here all the time. And by the way, I mean, anybody can come here, just you got to make an appointment. You do need to make an appointment. We want to have a speaker ready for you to hear, and we have a lot of different models. But I don't want to, okay, so the reason why you got that type of demo and the same demo here is that there's a lot of games that can be played. Meaning I can put some amplifiers behind it, I can put some cables behind it, I can do DACs and different streaming and things like that. We could even switch to pure analog and go vinyl with tubes and everything else. But when you get home, you're gonna go, well, gosh, what I heard at Eric's, it's not here in my room.
Right.
So I don't wanna try to over impress you, and so that's my personal philosophy. So when you got the audition, you got a pair of Encores, you got the IEMA amplifier at $79,
This little tiny thing,
and you got some Mogami cables at $5 a foot, and that was your experience. But intuitively, you had to have been thinking, oh my gosh, if I put this with my Pass Lab amplifier,
that's right, exactly,
and my $3,000 DAC, what the heck is it going to turn into? And that's where I'm reminded of people like Terry London, Clement Perry, Richard Willey, some of these guys that have really figured out my business model and appreciate what we do. I don't want to shoot over the moon by having really expensive stuff connected to a pair of speakers. Let's just keep it all well grounded, and then I'll try to impress you, and then you can take it home if you want to take it home. I don't make anybody buy anything, and hook it up to your really good gear and have a revelation.
Well, and that was kind of my point. Was I wasn't trying to say,
I have to share a story before we end too.
Oh, I wasn't trying to say that like these inexpensive amps are like state-of-the-art amps or anything like that. I was trying to say that I have heard these different versions, different models, sound good with a tremendous wide range of components. And I can't say the same about hardly any other speakers that I can think of. I mean, all you have to, you guys, you know what I'm talking about. You go online, you go on the forums, you can't go 5 minutes without finding somebody that's like, well, with the right amp, these speakers, with the right, so you've got these speakers and, oh, I love my speakers, but do you really? You had to like go through 15 amps to find the one that made them sound good. And everything else. Oh yeah, with the right, associated components. You could just like hook these things up to a freaking iPhone.
Here's some more insight. And if people watch some of my videos, they'll get this. Here's some more insight. When you take the speaker out of the box, I don't care what brand it is. When you take the speaker out of the box, if it doesn't sound good and right, it's never going to.
Right.
I mean, break in and burn in is one thing, but it's not gonna change the personality of the speaker. Okay. The other thing that I've said for years is like, you know what? Let's put up a curtain. Let's put up an acoustically transparent curtain. I'll take my years of I played the drums for you last night. I'll take my musical memory of what instruments sound like, and you just, whatever's behind there, I don't care. I don't care if it's big, small, expensive, cheap, whatever. Just try to convince me that I'm listening to the real presentation, the reality, the real musicians are back there performing for me. That's back to that, my 12 bullet points. I don't care what it is. And that brings me to another thing is like, hopefully people have figured out long before now that I'm a form following function guy. I mean, I love great industrial design, but that's not my business model. First and foremost, I go, you know what? I need to put the drivers here. I have to enclose it in an enclosure, and this is what we get. This is what we get. And just not to hog the conversation, But I want to share a funny story because I'll never forget it. But it was a few years back after you had bought Moabs and done the ultimate upgrade, which is something that we offer. Like, to be perfectly candid, if you're good, like you're good, then feel free to open up the speaker and pee on my fire hydrant. That's fine. I don't have a problem with it. But if you're not good,
It was more of an homage.
yeah, okay. But if you're not good, get the ultimate upgrade from us when you order the speaker, because there's a lot of wires. And if
I would do it that way totally if I had the option.
Like, you get one connection wrong and all bets are off. I mean, I can show you in measurements. You get one connection wrong on a pair of Moabs and it's junk.
If anybody's curious about this, and again, congratulations if you watched this far through this whole thing. If anybody's curious about this, go on the Audio Goon and find my thread, Miller Carbon, where I excruciatingly detail what I went through when I did these crossovers for my Moabs, and you'll get some idea. Like, just simply, once I had all the parts together, simply soldering them together was several hours of work. Just that one little part, and this is on a speaker that, I gotta say, if you had the Moabs like I had, it's probably one of the easiest speakers to do this with that you will find in the world, because you take the woofer off and you've got this big opening and there's your crossover. You've actually got access to it. So it's a good choice. But I went to great lengths to make sure that I didn't change anything in that crossover. Anything. Yeah. I measured the parts that were from you, and I measured the parts that I bought that went in.
Yeah.
I measured the inductors to make sure that they were absolutely the right.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to change any of the values.
Yeah. So it's a finely tuned system, and if you pop another inductor in there without the same resistance, or if you, I mean, all bets are off at that point. Because I have designed a very finely tuned system, and we go out and we pick parts that.
That's why, like, if you're into Porsche, like I am, then you go see the Singer. Go Google Singer if you don't know Singer, Porsche, and you will see what I'm talking about, because those guys didn't hot rod those 911s because they were deficient. They hot rodded those 911s because they loved the 911 and they just wanted more 911. So that's what I did, is I said, okay, I love this sound. I just want more, and it's a trade-off. If you tried to do that,
we had a Singer Porsche guy here just a few weeks back.
Really?
I mean, he's been on Jay Leno, and he just cold called me and says, "Hey, you know what? Hey, Eric, I like what you do. I'm coming out to see what you do." So now I got to share a story, because it's a funny story and it's a good story. So I'm just working one day. It's a Saturday, like usual. I'm dumb. I work every Saturday, and my phone rings about 3:00 in the afternoon, and it's Chuck. And he's like, "Hey, I'm at the Pacific Audio Fest, and you're not going to believe this, Eric. I think I have one of the best sounding rooms in the show."
Well, that's what people were telling me.
Yeah.
They were coming in and telling me, this is the best sounding room we've been to.
Pair of Moabs.
Wrap
your brain around that. I mean, how's that?
So just full disclosure, so people know, I'm basically just like a retired X-ray tech who's obsessed with the same stuff, audio stuff, and over the years, I've latched on to different brands and products that I really think are special, and so I had Townsend. Yeah. Townsend Audio approached me and wanted me to be like a rep or an importer or whatever you want to call it for them. I don't have a store, but so I felt very strongly about all their gear. So let's do that. And I've sold not made any money, but I've sold I've sold some to people, and they all love this stuff. And I did the same thing with Origin Live, and I did the same thing with Ralph at Atmosphere, and with his Class D amps. And so when I went to Pacific Audio Fest, I thought maybe that since it's local and everything, I might actually be able to sell something to like sort of defray the cost of doing it. That doesn't happen. I don't know why people even go to these shows. They're just horrifically expensive. They're a tremendous amount of work. You don't get any results from it in terms of money. I think it's, well, I know why they do it. It's because all the people that are at these shows, none of them are doing this business model.
No, and
by
the way, we typically we don't do trade shows anymore.
But I got
pay $500 for a round trip airplane ticket.
I gotta say, since now I've told people that I'm sort of kind of a little bit of an industry insider, I guess you might say, on a little microscopic level, but I understand a little bit about how the business works. Now, if you notice, almost all the brands that I mentioned, they sell direct to their customers. So there is no real margin. There is no real dealer margin that's there from Origin Live. And even though they make fantastic turntables and tone arms, you do not hear about them, because if a dealer has a choice, I can sell two $10,000 turntables, and if I sell the Origin Live, I make $3,000 or $4,000. If I sell a VPI, I make $6,000. Which one are they going to sell? Which one are they going to talk about? And it's the same for Townsend. They sell direct no matter where you are in the world. And that's what Eric's doing here. He's wiping out an enormous dealer margin. So it's no wonder that he doesn't have people coming out of the woodwork all over the place talking about nobody can make any money off of it. You're not even making that much money off of it.
I just love what I do, and I'm passionate about it.
You're making a living, but you know, you're not running around in a Ferrari, you know, to your 3 different beach homes.
Exactly.
You know, you're living a nice life here in Utah. And I'm glad you are, because I'm glad, and I think all these customers, I think, are really happy that there still is a guy that's out there that wants to just build speakers that average audiophiles can enjoy and not have to go into debt to do it. And yet, at the same time, people like me who, you know, can afford, I'm building, at the end of this whole trip, I'm going to build a nice listening room and get some Ulfbert 15s with some crazy crossovers to put in there. And I'm not doing it to save money. I'm doing it because I think it's the best thing I can find. If I can find better, I'll get better. I'm sorry to tell you that, but
nope, it's okay.
You know, but I don't see it happening.
It's a really special speaker. You've heard
it.
Yeah. Well,
to wrap up, anything
to say, I love what you're doing. I think you going from point to point, covering the map is really cool, and I appreciate you coming by here. We've never met. We've talked on the phone a few times.
Right, yeah.
First time you've ever been here, and you're always welcome here. And just appreciate you coming and really trying to discover what this operation's about, what this business model's about. And so thanks. I appreciate you, Chuck.
It's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot.
Good.
Take care, man.
Thanks, buddy.
See you guys. Hour and 13, that ought to do it.